I've always been the kind of person who overthinks everything. Every conversation, every glance, every moment gets replayed in my head 1,000 times until I've analyzed it to death. So when I took that job doing environmental surveys in the Pacific Northwest, I thought the isolation would be good for me. Fewer people meant fewer interactions to obsess over, fewer chances to make a fool of myself. I was wrong about that though, because sometimes one person is all it takes to turn your entire world upside down. My name is Oliver, and I'm a conservation biologist. I'd spent the last 3 years of my life in graduate school, buried in research papers and population models, barely seeing sunlight. When the opportunity came up to do fieldwork assessing old growth forests for a conservation project, I jumped at it. The job meant spending 6 weeks in remote logging territory, documenting tree species, measuring biodiversity, basically wandering around the woods with a clipboard and trying not to get lost. It sounded perfect, peaceful, safe. I arrived at the small logging town of Millbrook on a grey Tuesday morning in late September. The whole place felt like it existed in a different era. One main street with a diner, a hardware store, a post office. Pickup trucks with mud-splattered sides lined the curb. Everyone seemed to know everyone else. And I was very obviously the outsider in my REI hiking boots and North Face jacket, looking like I'd walked straight out of an outdoor gear catalogue. The logging company I'd be working alongside operated out of a building at the edge of town. They weren't thrilled about having an environmental assessor poking around their territory, but regulations were regulations. I was supposed to check in with their operations manager, get the safety briefing, and then I'd be assigned a guide who knew the terrain. That's what I was told anyway. I walked into the office and immediately felt out of place. The woman at the front desk looked me up and down with barely concealed amusement. She was maybe 50, with laugh lines around her eyes and grey streaks in her dark hair. "You must be the tree counter," she said, not unkindly. "Environmental surveyor," I corrected, then felt stupid for correcting her. "But yes, Oliver Brennan. I'm supposed to meet with someone about accessing the northern sections." She nodded and picked up a phone, pressed a button. "Thaddeus, your babysitting assignment is here." She hung up before whoever Thaddeus was could respond, then smiled at me. "He'll be out in a minute. Coffee." I accepted gratefully, wrapping my hands around the mug she offered. The coffee was strong and slightly burnt, tasting like it had been sitting on the burner for hours. I was taking my second sip when the door to the back offices opened and someone walked through. I need to be honest about this moment because it mattered. Because it was the first time I saw him. And something in my chest did this weird flutter thing that I'd never felt before. Not like this. He was tall. Probably 6'2" or 6'3", with broad shoulders that filled out his flannel shirt in a way that made my mouth go dry. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and slightly too long, curling at the edges. He had maybe 3 or 4 days of stubble on his jaw, and his hands looked like they could split logs bare-handed. But it was his eyes that got me. Dark hazel, almost green in the fluorescent light, and they looked tired. Not sleepy tired, but the kind of tired that comes from carrying weight you can't put down. "You're the surveyor," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice was deep, with a slight rasp to it, like gravel under water. "Oliver," I managed. "Yes." "You're Thaddeus." "Thad," he corrected, the same way I'd corrected the receptionist. Then something that might have been a smile flickered across his face. "Guess we're both particular about our names." I laughed, startled, and some of the tension in my shoulders released. "I guess so." Thad ran through the safety briefing with practiced efficiency. Bear awareness, communication protocols, emergency procedures. He'd be my guide for the first week, he explained, until I knew the territory well enough to work independently. We'd head out at dawn each day, spend 8 to 10 hours in the field, then return before dark. Standard stuff. One rule, he added, his expression serious. You do what I say, when I say it. No arguments. These woods aren't a playground, and I'm not interested in scraping anyone off the forest floor because they thought they knew better. Understood, I said, matching his serious tone. He studied me for a moment like he was trying to determine if I actually meant it, then nodded. We start at 6 tomorrow. Meet here. That night, lying in my rented room above the diner, I couldn't stop thinking about him, about the way he'd looked at me, assessing and careful, about his hands, scarred and capable, about the exhaustion in his eyes. I told myself it was just nerves about the job, about being in a new place. I told myself a lot of things that night that weren't quite true. The next morning I was waiting outside the logging company office at 5:45, 2 thermoses of coffee in my backpack, and my survey equipment checked 3 times. Thad pulled up at exactly 6 in a pickup truck that had seen better decades. The passenger door creaked when I opened it. You're punctual, he observed as I climbed in. So are you. Loggers' hours. You learn to wake up early, or you don't work. He pulled out onto the empty street, heading north toward the Forest Service roads. You ever spent real time in the woods? Not hiking trails, I mean actual wilderness. Some, I said. Field work in grad school. Nothing quite this remote, though. He nodded, like that confirmed something he'd suspected. We drove in silence for a while, the truck rattling over increasingly rough roads. I snuck glances at him when I thought he wasn't looking. He had one hand draped casually over the steering wheel, the other resting on the gear shift. There was a small scar on his left hand, running from his thumb to his wrist. I wondered how he'd gotten it. So, what made you want to count trees for a living? He asked eventually. I smiled. It's a bit more than counting. I'm looking at ecosystem health, biodiversity indicators, trying to establish baseline data for conservation efforts. Right. But why? It was a fair question. I grew up in Phoenix, I said. Concrete and strip malls and swimming pools in the desert. When I was 12, my parents took us to Yellowstone, and I saw a wolf. Just for a second, crossing a meadow at dusk. And I realized there was this whole world that existed completely separate from humans, that didn't need us, that was beautiful and complex and worth protecting. I guess I never stopped thinking about that wolf. I felt self-conscious after saying it, like I'd revealed too much. But when I glanced at Thad, he was nodding slowly. That's a better answer than most give, he said quietly. We reached the survey site around 7:30. Thad parked on an overgrown logging road, and we geared up, shouldering packs and equipment. The morning air was cold and damp, smelling of cedar and earth and something green I couldn't name. Fog hung in the trees like cobwebs. Stay close, Thad said. At least for today. I need to know you can handle the terrain. I followed him into the forest, and it was like stepping into another world. The trees here were massive, old-growth Douglas firs and western red cedars that had been standing for centuries. The canopy blocked out most of the light, creating a dim green twilight even though the sun was up. Everything was covered in moss, thick and impossibly green, muffling our footsteps. I'd been in forests before, but nothing like this. This felt ancient? Sacred, almost. Thad moved through it like he was part of it, navigating fallen logs and dense undergrowth with easy confidence. I tried to keep up, occasionally stopping to take measurements or make notes. He was patient with me, waiting without complaint whenever I needed to document something. Around mid-morning, we stopped for water. I was breathing hard from the exertion, but Thad barely seemed winded. He sat on a fallen log and pulled out a thermos. Took a long drink. You're doing better than I expected, he said. What did you expect? A slight smile. Most of the surveyors they send out here are pretty soft, not used to real physical work. We usually have to turn back by noon on the first day. I'm stubborn, I said, sitting down next to him. Not too close, but close enough that I could smell his scent, wood smoke and sweat and something else. Something that made me want to lean closer. I didn't. And I really love my job. I can see that. He was quiet for a moment, looking out at the forest. You know, I don't actually hate what you do, the conservation stuff. I know a lot of the guys in town think you're all just trying to put us out of work. But I get it. These trees, they've been here longer than any of us. They'll be here after we're gone, if we don't fuck it up too badly. I was surprised by that. You don't hear many loggers talk that way. Yeah, well. He stood up, shouldering his pack. Don't spread it around. I've got a reputation to maintain. We kept working, moving deeper into the survey area. I was documenting a particularly impressive cedar, measuring its circumference and estimating its age, when Thad called out, Oliver, you're going to want to see this. I followed the sound of his voice to where he stood in a small clearing. In the center was a tree unlike anything I'd seen before, a massive old growth fir that had to be at least 8 feet in diameter. Its bark was deeply furrowed, and its lowest branches started at least 60 feet up. It was magnificent. How old do you think? Thad asked. I approached slowly, reverently, pulled out my gear to take core samples. 600 years, maybe more. This tree was here before Columbus, before the Pilgrims. It's been standing here through everything. Yeah. Thad's voice was soft. This is why I brought you to this section first. Wanted you to see what we're trying to preserve. I looked at him, surprised. I thought you were a logger. I am. But that doesn't mean I want to cut everything down. Sustainable forestry means knowing what to take and what to leave. Trees like this, they're irreplaceable. They're the parents of the forest. He paused, looking up at the massive canopy. My grandfather was a logger. So was my father. They taught me that the forest isn't something you conquer. It's something you're part of. You take what you need, but you leave enough for tomorrow. There was something in his voice, a depth of feeling that made my chest tight. I wanted to say something meaningful, something that matched the moment, but all I could manage was, "That's beautiful." He glanced at me, and for a second our eyes met and held. Something passed between us, some current of understanding or connection that I didn't have words for. Then he looked away, cleared his throat. We should keep moving. Want to cover the northern ridge before we head back. The rest of that first day passed in a blur of work and walking. By the time we made it back to the truck, I was exhausted, my legs shaking and my feet blistered. Thad drove us back to town in comfortable silence. When he dropped me off at the diner, he said, "Same time tomorrow?" "I'll be there." I watched him drive away, then dragged myself upstairs and collapsed on the bed. Every muscle in my body ached, but I felt more alive than I had in months. Maybe years. And I couldn't stop thinking about the way Thad had looked at that ancient tree, the reverence in his voice, the way he'd looked at me. "Stop it," I told myself. "He's your guide. He's being professional. Don't make this into something it's not." But that night, I dreamed about him. About his hands and his voice and the way he moved through the forest like he belonged there. I woke up confused and frustrated, and more than a little scared. Because I'd never felt this way about anyone before. Not really. And definitely not about a man. The next few days fell into a rhythm. Early mornings, long days in the forest, Evenings spent transcribing notes and trying not to think too hard about the man who'd become my constant companion. Thad was a good guide, knowledgeable and patient, pointing out things I would have missed. He showed me how to read the forest, how to tell the age of a tree by its bark, how to identify animal trails and scat. He taught me which plants were edible and which would make me sick. We talked while we worked, conversations that ranged from forestry practices to philosophy to nothing in particular. I learned that he'd grown up in Millbrook, that he'd left for a few years to work in Seattle, that he'd come back after his father died to help his mother and take over the family business. I learned that he read poetry, which surprised me until he quoted Mary Oliver while we were examining a nurse log, and I realized it shouldn't have. I learned that he was 32, 4 years older than me, and that he'd been engaged once, but it hadn't worked out. She wanted me to move back to the city, he explained one afternoon as we ate lunch by a creek. Said she couldn't live in a small town anymore, that she felt trapped. I told her I'd visit, that we could make it work. But she said I had to choose. Her or this place. So you chose the forest, I said quietly. I chose myself. He picked up a smooth stone and tossed it into the water. She wasn't wrong about feeling trapped. This town, it can be suffocating if you don't fit into a pretty specific mold. But it's home. The forest is home. I couldn't leave it, even for her. I wanted to ask what he meant about fitting into a mold, but something in his expression stopped me. Instead, I said, I think I understand that. Needing a place that feels right, even if it's not perfect. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I felt that flutter in my chest again. Yeah, he said, I think you do. On the 5th day, we were working in a section of forest that was scheduled for selective logging. My job was to identify which trees were old enough or ecologically important enough to preserve. Thad was helping me flag the keepers, tying bright orange ribbons around the trunks. I was examining a hemlock about 40 feet up a steep slope when I heard the crack. It was loud and sharp, echoing through the trees. I looked up just in time to see a large branch, dead and heavy, breaking free from the tree above me. Everything happened in slow motion and all at once. I tried to move, but my foot caught on a root. The branch was falling, 30 feet of solid wood, plummeting toward my head. I had time to think, stupidly, that this was a really dumb way to die. Then something slammed into me from the side, hard enough to knock the wind from my lungs. The branch crashed down exactly where I'd been standing, hitting the ground with a sound like thunder. I was on the ground, pinned under something warm and heavy and breathing hard. Thad had tackled me out of the way. Are you okay? His voice was rough, urgent. He was hovering over me, his hands on my shoulders, his face inches from mine. Oliver, are you hurt? I'm fine, I managed, though my heart was hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. You saved my life. Fuck. He sat back slightly, but he didn't let go of me. When I saw that branch, I thought I wasn't going to reach you in time. We were lying there on the forest floor, me on my back and him half on top of me, and I suddenly became aware of every point where our bodies touched. His weight pressing me into the moss, his hands still on my shoulders, his face close enough that I could see flecks of gold in his hazel eyes, close enough that I could feel his breath on my face. I should have said something. Thanked him again, made a joke to break the tension. Something. But I couldn't speak, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at him and feel my entire body come alive with awareness. His eyes searched mine, and I saw the exact moment something shifted. The concern in his expression flickered into something else, something that made my breath catch. His gaze dropped to my mouth. just for a second, then back to my eyes. "Thad," I whispered, and I didn't even know what I was asking for. He made a sound low in his throat, almost a groan, and then he was kissing me, his mouth on mine, fierce and desperate and perfect. One of his hands slid from my shoulder to cup the back of my head, fingers tangling in my hair. I kissed him back without thinking, without questioning, my hands coming up to grip his shirt and pull him closer. It lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then he jerked back like I'd burned him, scrambling to his feet. His face was flushed, his breathing ragged. "Fuck," he said again. "Fuck, Oliver, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that. That was completely inappropriate. I was just worried and I wasn't thinking. And I'm sorry." I sat up slowly, my mind reeling. My lips still tingled where his had been. "Thad, it's okay. I didn't mind. I wanted you to." He turned away, running both hands through his hair. "It's not okay. You're here for work. I'm supposed to be professional. This can't happen." "Why not?" I got to my feet, my legs unsteady. "I'm an adult. You're an adult. We're both single. Why can't this happen?" "Because..." He still wouldn't look at me. "Because you're going to leave in a few weeks. Because this town isn't kind to people like us. Because I've spent my whole life being careful, and I can't just throw that away for something that has no future. People like us." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning. "You're gay," I said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Bye." He finally turned to face me, his expression guarded. "Not that it matters. Not that anyone here knows. And they can't know, Oliver. My business, my reputation, everything I've built, it all depends on fitting in, on being one of the guys. If people found out I was kissing the pretty environmental surveyor from the city, I'd be finished." Pretty. He'd called me pretty. My heart was doing acrobatics in my chest. So what do? We forget it happened. But he didn't sound convinced. "We finish the job, you go back to wherever you came from, and we forget it happened." I wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that I couldn't forget, that the feeling of his mouth on mine was already burned into my memory, that I'd been falling for him since the moment he walked into that office. But the look on his face stopped me. He was scared. Genuinely scared of what would happen if anyone found out. "Okay," I said softly. "We'll forget it happened." We worked in silence for the rest of the day. The easy companionship we'd built completely shattered. When he dropped me off that evening, he barely said goodbye. I watched him drive away and felt something crack inside my chest. That night, I lay awake for hours, reliving the kiss. The way he'd tasted, coffee and something sweet. The way his hand had felt in my hair. The desperate hunger in the way he'd kissed me, like he'd been starving for it. For me. And I thought about what he'd said, about being careful his whole life, about having to hide who he was to survive in this place. I thought about my own life, about the fact that I'd never really questioned my sexuality, because I'd never felt strongly enough about anyone to make it matter. I dated a few women in college, half-hearted relationships that fizzled out because I was never really invested. I'd told myself I was just focused on school, on my career, but maybe the truth was that I'd been waiting to feel something real. And now I'd felt it. And I couldn't have it. The next morning, I almost didn't go. Almost sent Thad a message saying I was sick, that I needed a day off. But I'd never been a coward, and I wasn't about to start now. So I showed up at 6, 2 coffees in hand like always, and climbed into his truck. "Morning," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Morning." We drove in awkward silence. The easy conversations were gone, replaced by this terrible tension that made my skin feel too tight. I hated it. Hated that one moment had ruined everything we'd been building. When we reached the trailhead, I couldn't take it anymore. Thad, can we talk about this? There's nothing to talk about. Bullshit. I turned to face him. Yesterday, you kissed me. Today, you can barely look at me. We need to talk about it. He gripped the steering wheel hard enough that his knuckles turned white. What do you want me to say, Oliver? That I'm attracted to you? Fine. I am. That I've been thinking about you constantly since the day we met? That I lie awake at night imagining what it would be like to touch you? I do. But it doesn't matter. Because nothing can happen. My breath caught. It matters to me. Why? He finally looked at me, and the raw emotion in his eyes made my chest ache. You're here for 3 more weeks, and then you're gone. Back to your real life. What do you want from me? A secret fling? A few stolen kisses in the woods where no one can see? I can't do that. I can't want something I can't have. What if you could have it? The words came out before I could stop them. What if I stayed? You're not going to stay. You've got a life somewhere else. A career. You're not going to throw that away for a guy you barely know in a town where you don't belong. He was right. And we both knew it. But that didn't make it hurt any less. We worked that day in miserable silence. And the next day. And the day after that. By the end of the week, I felt like I was suffocating. The forest that had felt so magical now felt claustrophobic. Every moment with Thad was torture, being so close to him and not being able to touch him, to tell him what I was feeling. On Friday evening, after he dropped me off, I made a decision. I walked to the local bar, a dive called the Timber Mill, and ordered a beer I didn't want. I needed to be around people, needed to stop thinking for a while. The bar was busy, full of loggers and mill workers unwinding after the work week. I sat in a corner booth and nursed my beer, watching the crowd. After about an hour, Thad walked in with a group of men I recognized from the logging company. He saw me immediately, his eyes widening slightly. Then he deliberately looked away and headed to the bar with his friends. I watched him laugh at their jokes, clap one of them on the shoulder, order another round. He looked relaxed, comfortable, completely at ease, like he belonged. And I realized that this was what he'd meant about fitting in. This was the mask he wore, the version of himself that was acceptable in this place. One of his friends, a big guy with a red beard, said something that made the whole group laugh. Thad grinned. But when his eyes flicked toward me for just a second, I saw the truth behind the smile. He was miserable. I finished my beer and left. I couldn't watch him pretend anymore. The next week, we were scheduled to survey a different section, higher up in the mountains. Thad picked me up Monday morning without a word, and we drove the winding forest roads in silence. The tension between us had shifted from awkward to painful. We were about 2 hours into the hike when we reached a steep ravine. There was a fallen log bridging the gap, thick enough to walk across if you were careful. Thad went first, crossing with easy confidence. I followed more slowly, trying not to look down at the 30-foot drop. I was halfway across when my foot slipped on a patch of wet moss. I windmilled my arms, trying to catch my balance, but I was already falling. I had time to think. Not again. Before my hand caught a branch jutting from the log, I hung there, suspended over the ravine, my shoulder screaming in protest. The branch was holding, but I could hear it creaking ominously. "Oliver!" Thad's voice was sharp with panic. "Hold on, I'm coming!" "The branch is breaking," I gasped. My fingers were already slipping, my palms slick with sweat. "I know. Just hold on for 10 more seconds." I heard him moving, fast and sure-footed. Then his hand closed around my wrist, strong and steady. "I've got you." let go of the branch. It's a long drop. I've got you, he repeated, his voice firm. Trust me. I let go. For a terrifying second I was falling, and then his other hand grabbed my arm, and he was hauling me up with a strength that shouldn't have been possible. He pulled me onto the log, then onto solid ground, and we collapsed together in a heap of tangled limbs and ragged breathing. You okay? He asked, his hands running over me, checking for injuries. Did you hurt anything? I'm fine. You caught me. I was shaking, adrenaline flooding my system. You keep saving my life. Yeah, well, you keep almost dying. His hands were still on me, one on my shoulder, one on my ribs. You're going to give me a heart attack. We were sitting close together, close enough that I could feel the heat of his body. His face was flushed from exertion, his eyes bright with worry. And suddenly I couldn't take it anymore. Couldn't stand the distance between us, the careful walls we'd built. Thad, I said quietly. I don't want to forget. He closed his eyes. Oliver, don't. I don't want to forget the way you kissed me. I don't want to pretend I don't feel this. I don't care if it's only for 3 more weeks. I'd rather have 3 weeks with you than nothing at all. You don't know what you're asking. But his hand on my ribs tightened, pulling me slightly closer. This town, these people, they're not forgiving. If anyone saw us, if anyone knew, it could destroy everything. Then we'll be careful. We'll be discreet. But please, Thad, please don't ask me to forget you. He opened his eyes, and the longing in them nearly broke me. I don't want to forget either, he whispered. I've been trying so hard and I can't. I can't stop thinking about you. Can't stop wanting you. Then stop trying. He made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. And then he was kissing me again. Different from the first time. Slower and deeper. Like he was memorizing the taste of me. His hands cupped my face, thumbs stroking my cheekbones. And I melted into him. We kissed until we were both breathless, until the sun had moved noticeably across the sky. When we finally pulled apart, Thad rested his forehead against mine. We have to be so careful, he said. No one can know. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I understand. And when you leave, when your job is done, this ends. We both walk away. No promises, no future. Just this. It hurt to hear him say it, but I nodded. Just this. He kissed me again, soft and sweet. And I tried not to think about the timer that had just started counting down. The next 2 weeks were the best and worst of my life. During the day, we worked. We surveyed forests and documented trees and maintained our professional distance. But the moments in between, the stolen kisses when we were sure no one could see, the way his hand would brush mine as we walked, the way he'd look at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention, those moments made everything worth it. In the evenings, after he dropped me at the diner, I'd wait an hour and then walk to his cabin on the edge of town. It was small and rustic, all wood and windows looking out at the forest. We'd cook dinner together, talking about everything and nothing. We'd sit on his porch and watch the stars come out. And then we'd go inside and he'd kiss me, like I was precious, like I was something worth savoring, and I'd feel more alive than I ever had before. We were careful, so careful. We never went anywhere together in town, never touched where anyone might see. I parked my rental car a quarter mile from his cabin and walked through the woods to reach it. We kept our secret locked tight. But secrets have weight, and this one was getting heavier. This one was... One night, lying in his bed with his arm around me and my head on his chest, I said, "Tell me about your family." He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing absent patterns on my shoulder. My dad died 3 years ago. Logging accident. A tree fell wrong, and he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. My mum never really recovered. She lives in town, spends most of her time in her garden. My sister moved to Portland years ago. We don't talk much. I'm sorry. About your dad. Yeah. Me too. He paused. He was a good man. Traditional, you know? Set in his ways. I never told him about being bi. Never told my mom either. I couldn't risk losing them, and I thought I had time. And then I didn't. I heard the regret in his voice and held him tighter. You think he would have rejected you? I don't know. Maybe. Probably. This town, this way of life, it doesn't leave much room for being different. And I was too scared to find out. He turned his head to press a kiss to my hair. That's why I came back here after Seattle. Guilt, maybe. Trying to make up for not being brave enough to be honest with him. You're brave, I said firmly. You're one of the bravest people I've ever met. I don't feel brave. I feel like a coward, hiding who I am, hiding you. You're protecting yourself. That's not cowardice. That's survival. He pulled me closer, and we lay there in the darkness, holding each other like we could stop time if we just held on tight enough. With 10 days left on my contract, I started to panic. The thought of leaving, of never seeing Thad again, became a physical ache in my chest. I started looking for excuses to extend my stay. Maybe I could propose a follow-up study. Maybe I could find another project in the area. Maybe. You're thinking too loud, Thad said one evening. We were on his porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Sorry. What's going on in that head of yours? I hesitated, then decided honesty was better than silence. I don't want to leave. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, I don't want you to leave either. So what do we do? I don't know, Oliver. I really don't know. He reached over and took my hand, threading our fingers together. I've been thinking about it constantly, about what it would mean if you stayed. If we tried to make this real. My heart leaped. And I'm terrified. Of what it would mean. Of how people would react. Of losing everything I've built here. But I'm also terrified of losing you. He turned to look at me, his eyes intense. You've changed something in me, made me realize how much of my life I've spent hiding, how tired I am of being afraid. Then don't be afraid. We can figure this out together. Can we? He shook his head. You have a career, Oliver. A life. I can't ask you to give that up to live in a tiny town where you'll always be an outsider, where we'll always have to be careful about who sees us together, who knows the truth. You're not asking. I'm offering. Why? Why would you do that? I took a breath, gathering my courage, because I love you. I know it's fast, and I know it's crazy, but I do. I love you, Thad, and I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose us. His breath caught. For a long moment, he just stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then he stood up, pulling me with him, and kissed me with a desperate intensity that made my knees weak. I love you too, he whispered against my lips. God help me, I love you too. We spent that night talking, really talking, about what it would mean if I stayed, about the challenges we'd face, the compromises we'd have to make. It wouldn't be easy. We'd still have to be discreet, at least at first. I'd have to find work in the area, build a life here, and there would always be people who wouldn't accept us, who would make things difficult. But maybe, Thad said, maybe it was time to stop living his life for other people Maybe it was time to be brave. The next morning, I called my program director and asked about extending my contract. There was more work to be done, I explained, more areas to survey. She was surprised, but pleased, and within a day it was arranged. I had another month, maybe 2 if I could justify it. When I told Thad, he smiled. Really smiled. The kind that reached his eyes and made him look 10 years younger. 2 more months, he said. That's a start. It's more than a start. It's a beginning. We still had to be careful, still had to maintain appearances in town. But knowing we had time, that this wasn't ending in a week, made everything feel different. Lighter. Like maybe we really could figure this out. One Saturday, Thad took me to meet his mother. She was a small woman with kind eyes and greying hair, and she looked at me with sharp intelligence when he introduced me as his friend. We had tea in her garden, surrounded by late-blooming roses, and she asked me about my work, my family, my plans. "You're good for him," she said quietly when Thad went inside to get more tea. I haven't seen him this happy in years. I didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know if she suspected, if she knew. But she patted my hand gently and smiled, and I thought maybe it didn't matter. Maybe love was obvious, even when you try to hide it. As the weeks passed, we fell into a rhythm. I extended my contract again, and then again. I started taking on freelance environmental consulting work for the region. Thad helped me find a small house to rent on the outskirts of town, a place with a view of the forest and enough distance from neighbors to give us privacy. We still weren't public. Still didn't hold hands in town or kiss where anyone could see. But slowly, carefully, we started building a life together. I'd spend evenings at his place, or he'd come to mine. We'd cook together, work together, fall asleep, tangled together. 6 months after I'd first arrived in Millbrook, Thad took me back to the ancient fir, the one he'd shown me on that first day. We stood in front of it, hands linked, looking up at the massive canopy. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, "about my dad, about regret, about living a life that's true. Yeah? I want to tell people about us. Not everyone, not all at once. But I want to stop hiding. I want to be able to hold your hand in public, to introduce you as my partner, not just my friend." I squeezed his hand. "Are you sure? We don't have to rush this." "I'm sure. I'm tired of being afraid, and I love you too much to keep pretending I don't." He turned to face me, his expression serious. "It might cost me some friends, some business, but I've realized something. This forest has been here for hundreds of years. It'll be here long after we're gone, and I don't want to waste the time I have being someone I'm not." "Then we'll do it together," I said. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." He kissed me there, in front of that ancient tree, and it felt like a promise, like a beginning. It wasn't easy telling people. Some of Thad's friends reacted badly. Some of the loggers refused to work with him. His mother cried, but then she hugged us both and said she just wanted him to be happy. The town gossips had a field day for a few weeks, but some people surprised us. The receptionist at the logging company, the one who'd called me the tree counter, brought us a casserole and said it was about damn time. The owner of the diner started saving us a corner booth. Slowly, gradually, we found our place. I'm not going to lie and say it was perfect. We still got stares sometimes, still had to deal with people who thought we were wrong or sinful or just plain weird. But we had each other, and we had this place, this forest that had brought us together. A year after that day when the branch broke and Thad caught me, we were back in that same section of forest. I was doing a follow-up survey, checking on the trees we'd flagged for preservation. Thad was with me, like always, helping carry equipment and keeping me safe. We stopped for lunch by the fallen log where he'd first kissed me. I was unwrapping a sandwich when he said, "Oliver, I have something for you." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it. Inside was a ring, simple and beautiful, made of wood with an inlay of turquoise. "I made it myself," he said, his voice nervous. "From a branch that fell from that big fir, the ancient one. I wanted to ask you, properly, if you'd stay. Not just for another month or another year, but for good. If you'd build a life here with me. If you'd marry me." I couldn't speak. Couldn't do anything but nod frantically as tears spilled down my cheeks. He slipped the ring on my finger, and then he was kissing me. And I was kissing him back. And the forest around us was alive with birdsong and wind in the trees and the promise of tomorrow. I'd come to this place thinking I was just doing a job. Counting trees, documenting ecosystems, checking boxes on a survey. But I'd found something I hadn't known I was looking for. I'd found home. I'd found love. I'd found myself. And it all started the day the logger caught me when the branch broke, and didn't set me down right away.